One of the greatest opening scenes in cinematic history happens right here, in a quiet South American jungle set in the 1930s. We meet two explorers who are following a mysterious man as he stops by a river to inspect a map, putting together its pieces one by one that we assume leads to something important. As this is happening, one of the travelers lingering behind attempts to pull out his gun and shoot the unsuspecting figure. But in an instant, that plan is ruined after the sight and crack of a whip rings across the screen, and this mysterious man turns around to reveal himself to be Indiana Jones. When I was a young kid, my mom showed me this movie for the first time, and I remember the moment I saw Indiana Jones step ominously into the light of the scene, how utterly entranced I was at this moment and what this movie was about to become. With the release of Dial of Destiny happening as you're seeing this, and I have seen the movie, I'm actually making this video because I want to celebrate the amazing ride that I've been on since childhood, and celebrate one of the most influential fictional characters the world has ever seen. From when I was just a kid watching Raiders of the Lost Ark with my mom, to being a young adult at the premiere of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, to even now, a 26-year-old YouTuber with an undying love for Harrison Ford, I never took the time to actually sit and relish in the world of Indiana Jones, so that's what I'm going to do here, as his final swan song begins and my love for this character lives on eternally. I'm going to reminisce about the good times and the simple, satisfying genius behind the original Uncharted series before Uncharted even existed. This is just a love letter to Indiana Jones, and very specifically, most of all, Raiders of the Lost Ark. I hope you enjoy. So much about Indiana's story that drew me in when I was young was, of course, the mysticism and biblical fantasy of it all. We all wanted to wear that hat and use our whip to defeat bad guys while finding cool ancient treasures and going on adventures. The bridge from the mundane to the otherworldly was built off of the back of this rough around the edges archaeologist, but what I've come to appreciate over the years is just how clean-cut the delivery of those stories were, how honestly and authentically they were laid out in the beginning, which made it really easy for me to latch onto almost every aspect of the films. From the archaeology and history to the action and relationships throughout, it was all so honest and transparent. Indiana Jones was very blunt with its humor. It didn't shy away from bloody 80s violence. It put its message and emotions all out on the table to dissect, and that approach often feels like it's missing in modern stories, sometimes even in the newest Indiana Jones movies. I really love how quiet those movies could be at times. Without self-pandering into meaningless dialogue or reveling in its own image, it knew when to just exist and build suspense as a scene plays out, giving the characters time to interact and work through the adventure. The movies had a way of sucking you into the world that would be completely butchered if redone today, and I think the best example of this aspect is the journey to the idol at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Not a lot is really spoken here, and instead we just get to sit and watch in this tense excitement as Indy traverses trap after trap and makes his way to the ultimate prize. And that quiet progress does so much more for the world than if there was a quip every other second. The romanticism of adventure and working subtle nuance into the characters with large, sweeping practical set pieces made this series feel every bit as rewarding to watch as it must have been for Indy to find the idol and subsequently the Ark. When something is truly excellent, it always looks simple in its delivery, and man, if there isn't a better way to summarize the brilliance of Indiana Jones at its purest. There is a culture to making his world work, a texture. It took its time building out the small moments in scenes where exposition was handled naturally, and it served the greater dreams of adventure and discovery, all whilst being succinct and lovingly straightforward. Now, this is in large part thanks to having a really tight script, something that Raiders gets acclaim for regularly, but for the trilogy as a whole, there was a lack of narrative fat, and that doesn't get talked about enough. There's no fat in the construction of this world, just purposeful interactions and really excellent execution in each scene, whether it gives you necessary subtext or leaves the exposition in the hands of a high-wire balancing act. Elegant in the simple delivery of everything. The love of clumsy heroism to a point of endearment is what made the movies so addictive as a child, and what keeps them so memorable as an adult. The curiosity of discovery rooted within real-world history helped evolve Indy following each subsequent film, and it worked so consistently because it was so easy to consume. An American archaeologist fights off Nazis to protect ancient artifacts. It doesn't get more marketable than that. The simple enjoyment as a fan of good guys versus bad guys, where the grays only really existed in the morality of the mission or the relationships Indy had with others and himself, but those all played off of each other in an organic harmony. It created this atmosphere that you really only get in Indiana Jones movies, which is why one of the first criteria you have to meet when making an Indiana Jones film is always, does it feel like an Indiana Jones film? Now, one of the most important attributes to Indiana Jones that I don't want to get lost in translation is just how vulnerable he is as a main character, which I think is why we as an audience found him so endearing and so easy to watch. Sure, he has his narrow escapes from dangerous environments, and it never gets old watching him punch Nazis in high-speed chases, but the legend of Indiana Jones can sometimes precede the actual character itself, when in reality it should be reversed. It was the human reflection of the man under the fedora that made the legend legendary. There was a vulnerability to his character, both physically and thematically, that the movies tended to play into that really worked throughout his stories, and that idea always found a way to remain at the forefront of his adventures. He was never the biggest guy, nor the strongest, so his fight scenes were always cleverly designed and required a lot of physicality to move through the scene, through the motions, and he was also a really simple yet capable professor in outlandish situations and environments, so his escapes required a bit of flair and finesse to pull off. The best indie stories always framed the cinematic moments with an undercurrent of vulnerability because, after all, he's just a guy, a really passionate archaeologist who's more interested in the history and significance of the relics he's chasing than the power they actually hold. Sometimes vulnerability and intimacy tend to go hand in hand, and I think that works here too. How movies like Raiders and Crusade really leaned into the intimate moments between characters, and the intimate atmosphere during an adventure became like the lifeblood of the story's nucleus. It gave more memorable color to the world that already had so much going on. The horror scenes in Raiders really connected with Indy because they all felt intimate. The romantic pauses and atmospheres between him and Marion felt intimate even just on their looks alone. The humor between Indy and Salo was layered with years of friendship, and the drama during run-ins with Belloc felt so personal. It's such a grounded and unfiltered projection of the world, reinforcing that intimacy aspect. That vulnerability that's honest and universal permeated through the action sequences as well, with dozens of narrow misses and last-second escapes, then back into his romance with archaeology and Marion, of course, where the history and the subtext speaks more words about Indy as a character than even the dialogue could. The volume of which his persona worked within was always a vulnerable one. It really felt like he could slip and lose it all at any moment, but he always narrowly succeeded and escaped and kept moving because he was Indiana Jones. It was just a guy who escapes by the skin of his teeth and improvises his way in and out of danger, and that's why we love him. It often felt like much of Indiana's story was treated as this serious period piece about his role as an archaeologist, and it was through that lens that I think many fans, myself included, first saw Indiana Jones and what we remember him most by. I always appreciated how the movie shot his scenes of discovery or conversations around ancient history with a really straightforward tone and a suspenseful one, because we were learning not only about the history of the world and the history surrounding the movie's plot, but how Indy understood his world and why he was so good at what he did. The through line was always about the historical impact of the artifact on Indiana personally, which made the race to find it that much more interesting because we wanted him to succeed and use his knowledge to outsmart and escape the bad guys. The tension that sat comfortably over those films made them rewatchable. It knew how to juggle that tone while staying on its feet and would balance the commitment to being an art piece, to a drama, to a western, to a horror film, to an adventure film all together at once. Something that Raiders of the Lost Ark doesn't get enough credit for, and a movie I consider to be the best in the trilogy. The legend of Indiana Jones was built through his humanity, as as it should have been. I like to compare Indy to someone from the modern age, like Nathan Drake, whose stories are so profoundly exciting and easy to get sucked into because of how he's been humanized through his adventures. I think Nathan is the perfect embodiment for what the modern-day Indiana Jones serials would look like and feel like, and given that the Uncharted games were heavily inspired by the early Indiana Jones films, it's easy to see why that translation is as successful as it is. But to wrap back to that beautiful simplicity of Indy, I think the best example of why he works as a character is honestly during his conversation with Dr. Brody after they have secured the permit to hunt down the Ark and chase the Nazis. We get a really honest conversation between the two that punctuates the foundation of what makes Indiana who he is as a character, where he expresses his lack of belief in the hocus-pocus aspects of the Ark, and he's just excited to potentially find it, if at all. You see, for Indiana Jones, it was always just about the chase, which is what a real Indiana Jones movie is all about. Much like how Mario games are about the journey to the castle, Indiana Jones's movies are about the journey to the discovery, the adventure to the relic. The tension that builds throughout the films from one stop to another that all works in service to the greater goal is what sells the dream, as the movies had great patience in letting tension and suspense build and the story build naturally, all at a smooth pace, which is really tough to do. These movies were for the general audience, absolutely, but the subtext layered throughout was so much more rewarding for the trained eye, and it didn't shy away from good, honest, bloody action or horror or thrilling action set pieces with time in between for intimate character growth. Watching these movies back now, there's just so much I picked up on that I didn't see as a kid, and that's a testament to the brilliance of the scripts and again, the subtext that's layered throughout. These films are remarkably well balanced, which is its own feat, and having a well-balanced cadence with everything Indiana Jones is when he's firing on all cylinders, that makes it so easy to suspend your disbelief and enjoy the ride every single time you watch. That is the magic of Indiana Jones. Speaking of magic, I do want to talk about Raiders of the Lost Ark, not only my favorite Indiana Jones film, but I believe one of the strongest films ever. It flows about as close to perfect as humanly possible for a film from the 80s. There was just a dirty, almost unpolished look and feel to the movie that gave it a raw sense of grit and groundedness that can only be replicated with practical shots. It was a movie about archaeology and history, but rooted in real-world aesthetics, which is why I think it worked at its most fundamental level. Every piece of action or romance was created organically as a result of the story, whether it be tracking down the medallion or fighting for possession of the Ark, instead of manufacturing those moments to strike a predetermined balance or to fill a runtime and hit a quota. That's what I mean when I say a movie flows so naturally, because there's really no fat around the edges. As far as scripts go, this is one of the tightest and cleanest scripts in terms of pacing and character construction that cinema has ever had to offer. There's no time wasted. There's only a deep sense of craftsmanship, and that craftsmanship in the original trilogy is unlike anything you'll find anywhere else, and it's entirely unique to that special feeling of an Indiana Jones adventure. Those movies knew when to be cinematic, when to be intimate, when to take their time, and when to speed up into the action or history of the adventure. And it was all shot that way. Scenes linger, shots sit in frame, close-up lenses highlight the tension between characters, and the color palettes reinforces the down-in-the-dirt, gritty world that Indiana often explores. I think the camera work in Raiders is also some of the best you'll see in a major film still to this day, because it knew how to hover just right during the intense moments and when to linger on personal beats for character growth. It was all framed with a vision that was as authentic as Indiana Jones himself. The setup of the humor was natural without being comedic, and dramatic without being overzealous, a wonderful blend of old Spielberg and Lucas working together. The practical nature of the shots and the action and the tightness of the script and the scenes all together, it left no fat on these movies, which you can see and feel when looking back. All of the action set pieces are incredible. Chase sequences had a real sense of danger to them because they were all practical, and you just can't replicate that feeling of Indiana Jones action without practical stunts and intimate action choreography. That tangible feeling of real stunts and gritty danger on location helps sell the entire Indiana Jones experience, and without it, you lose so much of that magic in the franchise. Sometimes it feels like modern adventure movies, even the last Indiana Jones movie, are a little heavy-handed in their ideas of what makes an adventure exciting, and they play too much into their idiosyncrasies, instead of embracing what worked in the 80s and 90s. Embracing the past to inform the future is what Indiana Jones is really all about, and it's that formula that makes his movies what they are. Now, when it comes to the Dial of Destiny, at the time of recording, I will have seen it in about 16 hours, which is before this video comes out. And I don't know what it's going to bring to the table. I don't know what Dial of Destiny will really provide, but there could be an argument that Indiana Jones should just leave with The Last Crusade and we don't need these extra movies. And I agree with that. I think it's time to let a character rest naturally and know when to end a series rather than dragging them on when they don't have to continue. But if there is one thing I'm going into Dial of Destiny looking for, I just hope that it's a good indie adventure and it pays respect to the character. I was very young when Kingdom of the Crystal Skull did come out, and at the time I enjoyed it, but growing older, I was also a child. I didn't realize exactly what I was seeing, and I see the flaws now. But for Dial of Destiny, I simply hope that they respect the legacy of Indiana Jones, they give him a proper send-off if they want to keep this one going past The Last Crusade, and they don't do him a disservice by using too much CGI, because then you lose the magic of Indiana Jones. At the end of the day, I have no idea what the movie's going to bring, but this was just a way to express my love for the series, to express a love for a character who is so important to pop culture and who has influenced so many genres of books and games and movies, and one of the best serial runs in cinema history. The world would be very different without Indiana Jones, and the world would be very, very less colorful without his original trilogy. Raiders is one of my favorite movies, and I hope that it's one of yours as well, because this was just a love letter to Indiana Jones, and I'm looking forward to him finally getting his rest, and hopefully he can stay at peace for a while. And as always, thanks for watching.